You had to create experiences, events, moments, campaigns that were really dependent upon what was going on in the world and that were tied to deep benefits for your audience.
Welcome to Virtually Live by Kaltura. Every week, we'll get into the latest and greatest in marketing, and specifically event marketing, audience engagement, and brand experience. To guide us through that, we've invited event professionals and marketing leaders from various industries. In this week's episode, Kaltura's VP Solutions Strategy and Enablement, Shirley Deutsch, speaks to Chief Marketing Communications Officer at Columbia Business School, Amy Jaick, about how virtual and hybrid events create exciting opportunities to build everlasting relationships with your audiences, wherever they are. Let's go!
Hi, I'm Shirley Deutsch, VP of Solutions Strategy and Enablement, and I'm coming to you virtually live from Tel Aviv. Our guest today is Amy Jaick, Chief Marketing and Communications Officer at Columbia Business School. Amy held senior marketing positions in large enterprises before joining Columbia Business School as CMCO. Very much on our radar throughout our conversations is identifying the differences between marketing and enterprise and higher education, if there are differences. And I know, Amy, that you have some thoughts about that. We've discussed it. But for this chat, though, we wanted to keep us focused on perhaps the first step to really any market and communication effort, right, done successfully, which is knowing your audience. But before we get there, hi, Amy. Welcome. Where are you joining us from?
Well, I'm right outside New York City in a place in Westchester called Larchmont.
Let's start at the beginning. You joined Columbia Business School as CMCO about a year and a half ago. What were some of the first things that you did in terms of team setup? Did you have folks in place? Did you need to kind of pivot strategy and mindsets? Tell us about kind of those early days as you're kind of forging a path forward.
Yeah, well, first, Shirley, thank you so much for having me. It's really exciting to be here. In terms of the early days, I think, it was a transition for me. This is my first full-time foray into higher education. And so I really spent the first bit of time learning. And I think regardless of where you go, whether it's a new industry or a new company, those first 30 days of that listening tour is so critical. And as I was going through that, what I heard was pretty consistent feedback about challenges, problems, opportunities, and areas where my team could really make a difference. So after that, I worked with our dean, Costis Maglaris, and set out our goals, and then figured out what the strategies were. I'm a firm believer that team design is actually the third or fourth step in the process that I've outlined, that it has to follow where your strategy is and where ultimately your goals are. So knowing what we were going to focus on in the 12 to 18 month road ahead, and then looking at 3 and 5 year kind of team structure and longer term goals, it became clear that we needed to adjust a bit in how we were perceiving things. So I came into an organization where many of the people had been there for a long time, but they hadn't worked together. So while they may have had some knowledge of Columbia Business School, they weren't there together as a team. And then we hired some new people. And so part of the design of the team was thinking through how do you mesh old and new? And another part was how do you structurally set up the team so it meets those goals? So more specifically, we have 4 functions within our marketing and communications team. The first is strategic communications, and their role is about identifying the stories and the messages that should be present in the marketplace and internally within our community. The second function is the content team, and so they really bring to life across mediums and channels our stories, those messages, and the areas we want to highlight. The third function is marketing, and their role is about connecting those stories and those messages to the right audiences. And the fourth is digital tools and operations. And they provide the digital infrastructure that our tech stack, our website, other elements that really allow the first 3 parts of the team to do their job. And they do it not only for our team, but we're looking at how to do that on an enterprise-wide level. So that's currently the structure that we are working with, and we found that it works really well for what we need to be doing in these first 12 to 18 months.
So, you talked about designing and creating the strategy, right? And I think we would probably agree that any good strategy starts with identifying and knowing who your audience is. So, I think that for most of us, at least those of us that are operating outside of higher education, me included, we would think that the audience for higher education marketing is prospective students. Seems kind of like the natural go-to. But, in our earlier conversations, what was really interesting to hear was that you actually identified, I think it was 5 different audiences that your team focuses on. Can you talk a little about who those audiences are?
Yeah, absolutely. And Shirley, you are exactly right that prospective students are indeed one of our audiences, but one of several. So we work with prospective students, current students, alumni, recruiters, and senior business and policy decision makers. And our efforts to reach prospective students are really about making sure that they understand the benefits that Columbia Business School or CBS has to offer, and that they're excited by the prospect of joining us. For current students, it's about energizing them, making sure that the experience that they have on campus and with CBS is both aligned to what they thought it would be and actually even surpasses that. For our recruiter audience, it's about that audience knowing very clearly the value and the benefit that our students bring. For alumni, it's reconnecting them to that feeling that they had on campus and to developing longer term relationships that can be in the form of mentorship. It can be in the form of donations. It can be in a variety of ways, but making sure that they stay connected to the school. And then for senior business decision makers and policy leaders, it's about understanding the knowledge that we generate within CBS and our ability to provide more insights and data and really help to shape some of the strategy that they're employing and their understanding of the larger landscape.
So, clearly these are audiences with very different interests, but, also they're different in terms of their demographics, they're different in terms of their age, in terms of the economics. What can you tell us in terms of the strategy for engaging different audiences, right? Are you using different tech stacks or investing in different channels, or is it about different content?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I jokingly refer to what we don't do, which is the spaghetti strategy. Kind of throw spaghetti against a wall, see what sticks, and hope that a one-size-fits-all approach works. I've learned in every way, shape, or form continuously throughout my career that no matter where you are, to your exact point, you can't assume that what you do for one will work for another. And so we are very thoughtful about how we reach these audiences. So to give you just an example, our tech stack, which I wish were farther along, that we're building the infrastructure now. But things like, when do we send emails? What do the emails look like? What are the messages? They would be segmented by audience. On social, we use Instagram, for instance, for our current and our prospective students. And that's really because we can bring to life the experience in a way that is different than a platform like Twitter. But we use LinkedIn very heavily for alumni and senior decision makers. When we think about media, we also make adjustments there for audiences. So we may pitch something like Morning Brew or newsletters more heavily for a prospective student audience or current student audience than we might for senior decision makers, where we might look more towards the Wall Street Journal or The Economist. The benefit of a great tech stack is that you can be filtering all of this information in, understanding what's working, and then leaning into the areas that work really well. So we are definitely trying to go audience by audience, making sure it's the right platform, the right message, and of course measuring to be able to optimize and change. Where it's working, lean in more, and where it's not, make adjustments.
So when you started Columbia, it was 2021. Probably safe to assume that there were already a lot of changes underway. Can you talk a little bit about communications and marketing, the changes, and the way it has evolved, really from before 2020 to today, and how, from a marketer's perspective, maybe there's some lessons there that you felt, it was important, relevant, to take forward and apply them to kind of more of your forward-thinking strategies?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, I think the world changed dramatically between 2020 and today and is still changing pretty rapidly. So a couple of takeaways were, and I think marketers tend to know this very well, is that nothing stays the same. And so the idea of being agile and the idea of being nimble and flexible, being able to pivot was, really front and center. There were so many strategies that had to be adapted very quickly, and to keep that mindset of maybe this will work, maybe this won't, we'll test, we'll move quickly, we'll change things. That's always going to be a benefit to marketers, and I think to audiences, right? Because they want their brands, they want organizations that they care about to move along with them. So I think that was one element. The second is that there obviously was less physical contact. And so the move to virtual platforms as a really strong way to connect and communicate with audiences was another. You continue to see organizations use virtual, even though many in-person events have come back. And it's because there's a benefit to that. It's because there's an opportunity for broader groups to join in on the conversation. You might not be limited by geographic boundaries. You might be able to draw on people who might not have felt comfortable at in-person events, but feel really comfortable participating or observing even from the sidelines on virtual. So you definitely saw a shift to the use of virtual platforms, whether it was virtual events, more communities springing up or being more kind of active within social media. So I think that's another element. And then the third is that, what we should be doing as marketers is thinking about what the audience needs and how we fit into their daily life, what benefit we can provide, how we can help improve their day-to-day. And when a lot of things moved online, you just had more data. If you were doing things like social listening, you should be picking up more information, So I think if you were paying attention and you used the changes in behavior to really listen to your audience, there are a lot of great marketers that found new insights just by virtue of spending more time online and kind of listening. And as marketers, we always have to be audience centric. So the last element was making sure that our communications, that our material was representative of the experiences people were going through at the time, and making sure that the messaging, didn't ignore what was happening in the world, that it fit into the life that people were leading, and that, the platforms were set up to be the platforms that people were using were the ones that marketers were using. We no longer had a choice of 7 or 8 options of where to be or what to do. And so I think, really understanding the 2 or 3 that were most important to audiences, not to marketers, but to audiences, and then building out strategies from there were pretty crucial.
I love that because, the whole putting the audience at the center, it kind of brings me back to, our earlier conversations around, is there a difference between enterprise marketing and higher ed marketing? And I love how, from the get-go you said, no, good marketing is good marketing, point blank. And I think that it really, speaks to that, which also makes me think, as you think about virtual events, right? And you think about audiences, your different audiences and kind of their different characteristics, do you also think that different events are more suited for, are better suited for different audiences?
That's a great question. I don't know if I mean, certainly there are events where being in person, really adds tremendous value. There are events where being virtual adds tremendous value. I don't know that I have a specific view on different types of events for different audiences, but you raise a really interesting point around how do you take that event and create assets for different audiences after? Because for me, and full disclosure, I worked in events marketing several years ago, and I'm a huge fan of both physical and virtual events. To me, the event is not the final action. And I think sometimes people tend to think, you've done all this work, you've put together a wonderful panel, you've gotten people to the event, and that's it. And if that's the end of the journey, that really is a missed opportunity. Because to me, it's actually equally as important what happens after your audience comes as what happens, on the evening or the morning that they get there.
So do you see the role of virtual events expanding in terms of your marketing and communication strategy? I think that Columbia Business School kind of is in this unique position because of the location, right? Like, it's hard to beat the excitement of New York City, especially when you have, the new campus that you just opened recently. So congratulations on that, by the way. Do you see virtual events expanding in your strategy, and kind of how are you thinking about the in-person versus virtual? Is it taking up kind of a different place in your marketing communication toolkit?
Yeah, that's a great question. So we were fortunate in that we have been in person as a community for most of COVID, with health precautions, of course, but we weren't able to hold events. So coming back to this idea of having events as a really important part of how we communicate with audiences is really exciting for us. I think as most marketers have probably seen, there's been a rush to kind of physical in-person events because so many of them haven't happened for so long. So we're certainly trying to meet that need. And as you said, Shirley, the being in New York is an incredible advantage for us. It means that we have access to some of the top leaders from around the world, and that when those who don't live here pass through, we're really fortunate that, oftentimes they will make a stop at Columbia Business School. And so we're able to do incredible events with incredible people. But we're now thinking of how do we make sure that the lessons we learned and the advantages that virtual had don't fall by the wayside. So one of the things that we're always thinking about is, can this event also have a virtual component? We want to make sure that these events are as accessible to as many people as possible. And so previously it may have only been physical. Now it will likely have some level of a virtual event as well. The second is we've seen some incredible success with virtual series, and that has allowed us to work with speakers from around the world, whether or not they were passing through New York. And so there's a number of those types of events that continue to be virtual because we simply have access to more incredible leaders, who may or may not be in New York. And then the third element that I think is really interesting for us is we often thought about how do we take what happens in New York and kind of broadcast that in a bigger way. Now, with what we've seen in terms of virtual events and the benefits that it gives us, we're actually thinking about the converse as well. So we have 50,000 alumni from around the world, and there are an incredible number of events in which we or they are participating. And we're now starting to think, how do we take what's happening internationally and stream that back into our New York community? So for example, for the first time, we as CBS, as Columbia Business School, will be at COP27. We'll be at the COP conference, COP27 in Egypt. And we're putting on a large scale panel event with the Dean of the Climate School and the Dean of the Business School. And that's not something that everybody will be able to physically attend. But we're thinking about how do we take that moment, which previously would have only been accessible to the people attending the conference. We're now thinking, how do we take that moment and bring that back to the community? Do we live stream that for our students? Do we tape that and create some sort of opportunity to access it later? Do we have people, come and join it as a webinar? So we're certainly thinking a bit differently about all of the events that we're putting on. How do we make those, bigger and broader? And then how can we create new opportunities where it makes sense? So a lot to think about. No defined answers yet, but certainly, very much top of mind for us.
Yeah, so it's very clear there's so many opportunities, and I loved everything that you talked about. Putting the audience in the center, thinking about who they are, where to meet them. What value you can bring to them. How do virtual events, figure into your overall strategy, even with a prime location, such as New York City. How do you actually leverage, the power of virtual events in order to connect your global community in a much, stronger and richer way. So I want to say thank you for your time and for all the insight that you shared.
Well, thank you, Shirley. It was such a pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you, Amy Jaick and Shirley Deutsch, for joining us today. And thank you for tuning in. To give you a little taste of what's coming next week, here's 7 questions and events with Microsoft's Corporate Vice President, Global Events, Production Studios, and Marketing Community, Bob Bejan.
Welcome, everybody, to 7 by 7 with industry expert Bob Bejan. We have no time to waste, so let's go. First question, Bob. What's the one thing you want your attendees to get out of your events?
What they need to get out of it. Hopefully they get what they need, and that's why they're there. And when they leave, that's what they feel good about.
That's great. What's your favorite way to engage with your audience?
Whether it's digital and being inside a chat stream, kind of and interacting with audience members, or it's walking the back of the house when a session is on, getting as close as you can to the audience to sense how they're feeling and engaging is the way I like to engage.
Who would your dream keynote be? No restrictions.
Walt Disney.
Oh, I like that one. Good answer. Which trend in virtual events are you most looking forward to?
Defining the intermingling of the digital innovation that we've had over the last 2 years with the return of in-person experiences.
What's an event marketing pitfall people should watch out for?
Racing to make things as they were instead of building on the way things are.
Oh, very good one. What's your go-to source for personal development in terms of events and marketing?
Riding my bicycle.
Awesome. And give a shout out to another event professional.
Shout out to Invent. It's one of our best partners in all of the event marketing world, and I love working with them every day.
Wonderful, wonderful. Thank you, Bob, for joining us. That was great.